Hey everyone, those of you guys who have been watching my channel for a while have seen me do several videos on this. This is the Svea 123 stove, and today I'm just going to do a proper review of it and just kind of go over why I think it's an excellent stove. My model here, just to be clear, is a 123, not the 123R. I'll put a link to a video that I've done that explains the difference between those two. But this basically is the model from the 1950s to the mid-1970s, and then they came out with the 123R version, which is very similar, it just has a built-in cleaning needle. So check out that video if you want to see the differences between them. But in my opinion, this review will suffice for both stoves because they're so similar. So we'll start out with what you get. Comes in this little package here. The top here is a small aluminum cup, and it has a little handle like this, makes a little pot thing so you can pick it up off the stove. I actually don't carry mine, I don't carry this with me just because it's kind of extra weight. This cup holds about 1.5 cups of water, but I think you could only boil 1 cup safely in it to give you a little bit of distance so it doesn't boil over. And it's not the best quality aluminum, and it's just kind of small for anything I'd use it for. So some people might find it useful for scooping up snow or water or something. I don't find much use to it, so I leave that stuff at home. And then the stove itself here, I've got a few things tucked in here. Since mine's the 123, it comes with this little jet pricker tool, which is just a little, I don't know if you can see, it's got a little wire coming out here, and so you use that to stick down in the jet to clean the jet if it gets clogged. The newer 123R models have this built in, so you won't get this with it. I've got a little straw tucked in here. I'll show you where that comes in handy, and I keep a lighter in with mine. And then here's the stove itself. Basically is 2 pieces that kind of lock together like that. Here is a little kind of semi-windscreen and pot stand. Has these little legs up here that you can turn, so you can go for larger diameter pots or keep them tucked in if you're using a smaller pot. And then the stove itself has a built-in fuel tank here, fuel cap, a little throttle valve, and this particular style stove is a plate burner and the little throttle key. So we'll go outside in the garage and get it all set up and fired up, and we'll do a proper boil test with it. Alright, so like any white gas stove, you have to prime the Svea 123, and the way you do that is it has a little trough down in here, and you pour some fuel into that and light it on fire, and that preheats the burner, and then you're off to the races. So I showed you that I had this little straw here that I carry with it, and the reason I carry that is I can unscrew the fuel cap and dip that straw in there and get a little fuel out and dump it in the trough there. Today I'm just going to be using some denatured alcohol, just so I got some here, just because it burns a little bit cleaner. So the first thing you want to do when you're priming it is unscrew the fuel cap just a hair to equalize the pressure. I call that burping the Svea. And then make sure you get it screwed on tight, obviously. And then we'll just fill that trough up with some denatured alcohol and light it up and let it preheat. While that's going, we can take our windscreen here, feed the key through, and go ahead and carefully get that fitted into place. And now once the fuel burns off, we'll just go ahead and light it up. Okay, so all our priming fuel is burned off there, so we'll just go ahead and light it up. That'll take a little bit of burn in there to get up to full preheat. So while it's going, let me go over a couple safety aspects of the stove. First of all, you don't want to use a full windscreen with this stove. The way it works is it uses heat from the burner that goes down the stem and warms the fuel tank to pressurize it. The more modern white gas stoves have an external fuel tank that you pump up to get the pressure. This just relies on the heat it generates. If you get a full windscreen around it, you can actually, there's a danger of too much heat being reflected back in, and it'll warm up the tank so much that the fuel will start to boil, and then this tank will overpressurize. It has a pressure release valve, and if that blows, then it's going to shoot a jet of vaporized fuel, which is going to catch on fire, and you're going to have a huge fireball on your hands. If it doesn't blow, then the tank is going to explode. So best to just not use a full windscreen with the stove for sure. Other safety aspect is just to make sure you prime it properly. You'll see a couple guys on YouTube who take their fuel bottle and dump fuel all over it and light the whole stove on fire. You don't really want to do it that way. Maybe in the winter time, maybe, but you really just want to fill that little trough with some fuel and preheat it that way. I think we're probably up to full temperature here. One other thing is when it's running, you want to leave the throttle key off. It'll get pretty hot and you'll go in and burn yourself if you try to adjust it. So, as in my other boil tests, I've got the GSI Pinnacle Dualist pot here with 2 cups of cold tap water, and we'll set that on there, and the timer is going. We'll be back when we have a boil. Alright, we just hit a rolling boil, about 4 minutes and 20 seconds. So we'll go ahead and pull this off here. As you can hear, that thing is loud when it's roaring. Real quick, we'll just go over the flame adjustment, and then I'll shut it off so you can actually hear me over the stove. So here you can see is what it looks like when it's just balls out, full blowtorch mode. But this stove does a great job of simmering. You can turn it down, just get a real nice low flame there for simmering. And then, of course, back up to the full blast furnace. Pretty sweet. So we'll go ahead and just turn the throttle key all the way, and now we'll just let the stove cool down, and we'll go inside and finish up the review. So let's do a quick weight comparison here. This is my other white gas stove that I own. I've done a video on this. This is the Optimus Nova. In this pouch is the stove, the pump, the maintenance kit, the multi-tool, and the windscreen. Everything, you know, you'd probably carry out to run the stove. And also, I have the medium-sized fuel bottle, and since you need that to run the stove, I'll just set that on top there. So that doesn't really show, but there you go. 1 pound, 9 5/8 ounces, or 728 grams for that. Now the Svea, that fuel bottle was empty too, by the way. And here I've got the Svea 123. It also, I've drained the fuel out of its fuel tank. And it has everything you'll need to run it. The little jet pricker tool, the key, and the windscreen and everything. Set that on there. 15 1/4 ounce, or 431 grams. So you can see that the Svea is actually quite a bit lighter by several ounces than the Nova. Now I know you're going to say is that this only holds enough fuel for about an overnighter, maybe a weekend, depending on how many hot meals you cook. Whereas the Nova has this big fuel bottle that'll last you probably a week or more. But even if I throw that in, we're still at 557 grams, 1 pound, 3 5/8 ounces. So even the Svea is set up to do a week's worth, you know, roughly the same amount of time as the Nova. The weight on it is actually a little bit less. Now, it's not saying much because the Nova is a pretty hefty expedition stove, but I just wanted to throw that comparison out there because this thing, looking like a giant hunk of brass, looks pretty heavy. It is fairly heavy comparatively, but you know, it can compete out there. Not too bad for 1950s technology. So there's that. Alright, just to wrap things up real quick, we'll go over just kind of the pros and cons of the stove, so in my opinion. So the primary con, as you saw in the boil test, is that it is a very loud stove. So it's going to interrupt your wilderness experience for a few minutes while you're cooking. So if that's important to you, obviously be aware of that. The other major con is that because it relies on the heat generated to warm the tank and pressurize it in cold weather or in the winter, you're going to have something underneath it to insulate it from the cold ground. You know, a couple sticks, or you could carry a piece of cardboard or something. Not a big deal, but just be aware of that. And then I don't really count this too much against the stove itself, but because any stove that's used improperly can be dangerous. But if you're not aware of how to use the stove safely, as I was pointing out with the windscreen, it can be dangerous. So be aware of how to use the stove properly before you go out and use it. But then on to the pros. My favorite thing about this stove is that it has one moving part, and that is the throttle key. Just, you know, throttling it up or down is a little threaded thing. That's it. The only moving part in the stove, and it only has one gasket. It has an O-ring under the fuel cap there to keep it sealed. So one O-ring, one moving part translates into just a super reliable stove. There's kind of a cult following around this stove where guys who bought them when they were kids back in the 60s and 70s, and they're still using the same stove. If you take care of it, it just goes and goes and goes, and I think that's pretty awesome. The construction of it is just pretty bomb-proof. You take carrying it with the windscreen on, you can just stuff it right down in your pack. You don't really need to have a carrying case or anything for it, just because it's plenty solid as it is. The fact that it has an integrated fuel tank is really nice, because most of the trips I do are just for an overnight or maybe 2 nights, and it carries just enough fuel that you need, so you get kind of a nice little low bulk package out of it. So I like that. And so to kind of summarize, the Svea isn't the fastest white gas stove you can get. It's not the lightest white gas stove you can get, but it's just a time-tested design that's super reliable. I would say that the Svea 123 is to the world of liquid stoves what the Trangia is to alcohol stoves. Not the lightest, not the fastest, but just bomb-proof, time-tested, reliable design. So I hope that was helpful. If anybody has any questions about the stove, let me know. Thank you very much for watching.